Just kill me fast, she said. The lonely soldier lifted her skirt and saw what they'd branded into her skin. Texas Hill Country, spring of 1865. The war had ended 2 weeks ago, but no one told the land. The hills still held the ghosts. The air still tasted of smoke and blood. Elias Gray hadn't spoken to another soul in 3 days. He rode with sore ribs, worn boots, and a name that no longer felt like it belonged to anyone. Rufus. His old gelding stopped suddenly near the creek bend, ears pricked forward, nostrils flaring. That's when Elias knew something wasn't right. He dismounted slowly. His revolver was loose in its holster, not from fear, but from habit. The ground beneath his boots squelched the earth still wet from a storm that passed 2 nights back. And then he saw her. She lay curled near the edge of the water, a tangle of limbs and torn cloth. Her skin was pale, her lips cracked. One leg was twisted unnaturally beneath her, the other exposed, streaked with dirt blood, and something far worse, resignation. He dropped to a knee. "Miss," he asked softly. She didn't answer. Her chest rose barely. A ghost of a breath. "I'm not gonna hurt you," he whispered, though she likely didn't hear him. Carefully, he reached for the hem of her dress to check the bleeding. That's when she jolted upright, eyes wide, wild, hunted. "No," she gasped. "Please, just kill me fast." He froze. The way she looked at him wasn't fear. It was certainty. The kind of certainty only someone who'd already given up could carry in their bones. "I ain't killing anyone today," he said slowly. "You're hurt. I just want to stop the bleeding." Her chest rose and fell like she was trying to hold back an invisible flood, but she didn't move when he knelt beside her again. Her body flinched as he gently lifted the fabric above her thigh, and then she stopped breathing altogether. There, seared into the soft flesh of her inner leg, was a brand. A single word, red and permanent. A mark not meant to heal, but to own. Elias's stomach twisted. He had seen something like this once before outside Monroe, when his unit found a camp they weren't supposed to. Women shackled and half dead, all branded. He had never forgotten the sound one of them made when they cut her chains. It wasn't a scream. It was silence too deep to be heard. He tied a cloth around her wound. The blood kept coming. "What's your name?" he asked gently. She didn't answer. Her eyes drifted away. "I'm Elias Gray," he said. "You're safe now." But even he didn't quite believe that. Not in Texas. Not in that time. As he carried her toward the cabin, nestled beneath the twisted oaks, her head slumped against his chest. She hadn't given her name. Not her voice. Only the soundless scream that still clung to her skin. He didn't know yet that this wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. "Where are you watching from tonight? Whether it's Texas or Tennessee, we're grateful to have you here. Stay with us because the story is only just getting started." The brand was angry red and still weeping. It sat on the soft flesh of her inner thigh, like a curse seared into the skin, deliberate, deep, meant not just to mark, but to erase. Elias had seen bullet wounds, bayonet stabs, men blown apart by cannon fire. But this was different. This wasn't violence in the heat of battle. This was violence planned, repeated, and hidden. He tightened the bandage slowly, careful not to touch what didn't need touching. Her leg trembled beneath his hand, though she didn't make a sound. She didn't need to. Her silence said more than screams ever could. When he wrapped his coat around her and lifted her into his arms, her head lolled against his chest. Not trust, just surrender. The trail back to his cabin curved through low brush and bare trees, branches scraping against the saddle as if trying to keep them from moving forward. His jaw stayed clenched the entire way, eyes flicking over every shadow. Whoever had done this, they weren't far. That kind of evil didn't disappear. It lingered like smoke, like shame. Inside the cabin, the fire had gone cold. He laid her gently on the bedroll near the hearth and lit kindling fast. Warmth returned in small breaths, orange light stretching across the floor, dancing across her dirt-streaked face. She watched him, not blinking, not moving, just watching like she was trying to decide if he'd change once the door was closed. "I need to clean the wound," he said. "There's salve, herbs." Still nothing. "I'll turn my back if you want." She didn't nod, didn't shake her head, just closed her eyes for a long moment. That was her answer. He worked in silence, dabbed the broken skin with warm water and herbs mashed into a paste. Her body flinched once, then went still again. Her breath hitched when the salve touched the raw edge of the brand, but her lips didn't part. Elias swallowed hard. He'd seen things in war, but something about this moment kneeling by a girl marked like cattle, it felt heavier than any battlefield. This wasn't just a wound. It was a message: you are not yours. And maybe that was what made his hands shake as he tied the final knot in the bandage. She hadn't looked at the brand once. She didn't have to, because the worst part about being marked isn't the scar itself. It's the fear that no one will ever look at you and see anything else. Some wounds bleed once, others bleed every time someone looks away. That night, Elias sat by the fire, her sleeping form curled tight under a worn blanket. He didn't sleep, just stared at the embers and wondered who she was, before the mark, before silence. She hadn't said a word since "Kill Me Fast." But in the quiet, Elias made a promise he didn't speak aloud. Whatever that brand meant to the men who burned it into her, it would never define her here. The fire burned steady through the night, but the girl didn't sleep. Not fully. Elias could hear her breathing shift every time the wind scraped the shutters. Could see the way her fingers clutched the edge of the blanket, like it might vanish if she let go. She didn't speak. Not when he brought her water. Not when he set food by her side. Not even when the cabin walls creaked in the cold, and his own voice broke the silence: "You're safe here." Because safe is a word that means nothing to someone who's only ever known survival. On the third morning, she was sitting upright, eyes hollow, hair tangled with leaves and blood. Elias approached slowly, an old comb in his hand. He didn't say much, just held it out like an offering. "If you'll allow it," he said, "I can help with that mess." She hesitated, then without meeting his gaze turned her back. That was the most trust he'd been given since she arrived. He started gently working from the ends. Her hair was matted, brittle in places, sticky with old wounds and dirt. He didn't tug, didn't hurry, just combed in silence as the fire crackled behind them. Halfway through, she exhaled, a real breath, the first one that didn't sound like a warning. Later that day, Elias left a small oval mirror on the stool beside her bedroll. The glass was old, clouded with scratches, the kind a soldier might carry to remember his face or forget it. "Just in case," he said simply. "You want to see?" She stared at the mirror for a long while. Then, with a sudden motion, she picked it up and hurled it at the hearth, its shattered shards glinting like stars in the ash. Elias didn't flinch. She didn't cry. "I don't want to see her," she whispered, voice dry and tight. He nodded. "That's all right." He didn't ask who her was. He already knew. It was the version of herself before the brand. The one no one had protected. Sometimes healing starts with not looking, with letting the mirror break instead of the soul. That night, she didn't push the food away. She didn't speak, but when he offered the spoon, she took it from his hand and fed herself slow, cautious bites. Her eyes never left him, not with fear, with calculation, as if she were still deciding whether he was another cage or something else entirely. When she handed the bowl back, her fingers brushed his, just for a moment. She didn't pull away. And Elias, who'd once thought the war had taken everything from him, realized something had begun to return, not hope, not yet, but the possibility of it. The road into Bandera was nothing but dust, cedar brush, and long memory. Elias rode slow, careful not to jostle the woman behind him. Her arms were wrapped lightly around his waist, not for affection, not yet, but because her body still hadn't remembered how to stand on its own. She hadn't spoken since the mirror shattered 2 days ago. But that silence no longer felt empty. It felt intentional. Bandera was the kind of town where the war lingered behind every window. Men wore their bitterness like medals. Women passed rumors quicker than bread. No one asked questions, not unless they wanted to become the answer. They dismounted near the general store. Elias helped her down gently. Her shawl was pulled low, hiding half her face. Still, the moment he stepped inside, she tensed. And then he saw why. A man stumbled from the saloon across the street, thick arms, rotten teeth, voice slurred by whiskey. He didn't look twice at Elias, but he looked at her. "Well," he said, stepping closer. "Ain't you a familiar little whore?" Elias turned. The man's grin widened. "You don't remember me." His hand shot forward, grabbing the edge of her skirt, and yanked. Gasps rippled through the street. There, raw and gleaming in the sun, was the brand. One word, burned into her flesh. Someone whispered, "That's one of them." Another woman pulled her child away. No one stepped forward. The man leaned close. "Runaway meat," he hissed. Elias didn't hesitate. One shove sent the man sprawling into the watering trough. The next 3 punches left him bleeding into the dust. No one stopped it. No one helped either. He grabbed her hand. "Let's go," he muttered. They rode out of Bandera without another word. Sometimes the deepest wounds aren't carved by blades, but by the eyes that see and still choose to turn away. Back at the cabin, silence clung like smoke. She sat near the fire, back straight, lips tight. Elias tried to speak, but her hand went up firm. "No," she said. "Don't. Please." That night, the rain returned. Cold. Heavy. Elias woke before dawn to find her gone. Panic clawed up his throat. He ran outside barefoot in the wet earth and saw her. Standing at the river's edge, arms folded, hair soaked to her back. Face turned toward the current like it might carry her away if she just leaned forward enough. "I can't live like this," she said, voice soft but clear. "They don't see a woman. They see the mark. That's all I'll ever be." Elias didn't try to argue. He just stepped closer. "You are not that word," he said. "You are not what they did." She turned eyes full of rain or tears. "Then what am I?" He reached for her hand, trembling. "You're the reason I still believe this world has anything good left in it." She stared at him a long time, and then let him pull her back from the edge. The rain didn't stop. It came in steady sheets, the kind that carved lines through the earth and washed away anything not anchored down. She stood at the river's edge, barefoot, the hem of her dress soaked, plastered to her calves, like it belonged to someone else. Elias had found her just in time, just close enough. She didn't look at him, not at first, just kept her eyes on the water like it might rise up and carry her off without asking permission. "I'm tired," she said. "Tired of being watched, whispered about, branded before I even speak." "You're not alone anymore," Elias said, voice low behind her. "And I don't see the brand when I look at you." She let out a bitter sound. "They always say that. Until they do, I'm not they." His boots shifted through mud as he stepped closer. "I know what it means to be burned and forgotten, to carry things people can't see and don't want to hear." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the rush of river and the ache of unsaid things. Then with trembling fingers, she reached down and lifted the hem of her skirt slightly, just enough to show the angry mark again. She didn't flinch this time. "I didn't scream when they did it," she said. "Not once. But it burned through me like fire. And it never really stopped." He said nothing, didn't move, just listened. "I wasn't born for pain," she whispered. "I was born for more than this." But they tried to rewrite that story with iron and fire. Now she turned to face him, soaked to the bone, eyes clear for the first time since the creek. "I want it back," she said. "My name, my breath, my own damn reflection." Elias stepped forward, closed the space between them. Rain slicked his shoulders. His voice cracked when he asked, "Then tell me, what do I call you?" She blinked. Once, twice, then quiet but sure. "My name is Mave." He exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for a year. "Mave," he repeated, and something in her face softened. Sometimes the bravest thing a soul can do is say its own name out loud. That night he cooked beans again. She didn't eat much, but she fed herself, and afterward she sat closer to the fire, not pressed into corners like before. She didn't speak again, but before sleep took her, she whispered into the dark, "Thank you for not pulling me back, for standing there until I stepped away on my own." And that's when he knew. This wasn't a rescue. It was a return. If you're still here, I wonder, where are you watching from? Drop your state or hometown in the comments. Let's see how far stories like Mave's can travel across the map. Bandera didn't change, but Mave had. This time she didn't ride in, tucked behind Elias like a shadow. She rode beside him. Her chin held just a little higher, her scarf loose around her neck, not hiding, just ready. They needed medicine. Fresh gauze, clean water, something for Elias's ribs that still hadn't healed right. But Mave came for more than bandages. She came for truth. The general store was quiet, a bell overhead chiming hollow as they entered. Elias handed the list to the clerk without a word. Mave waited by the doorway, her eyes scanning every corner like a soldier remembering the shape of a battlefield. Then she saw him. Across the street in the saloon doorway, leaning against the frame like he owned the land. Thick shoulders, graying hair, and that scar running from temple to jaw like a brand of his own making. Jonah Beexley. He stepped forward slow, confident, and there pinned to his chest, catching the afternoon light, a badge. Sheriff. Mave's stomach turned. Her fingers went white around the folds of her shawl. Beexley smirked when he saw her, like a wolf recognizing an old wound. "Well," he drawled, voice dripping with vinegar, "ain't this a reunion?" Elias stepped between them before she could answer. His stance wasn't loud. It was final. Beexley's hand hovered near his belt. Not his gun, his flask. Still dragging her around like a war trophy, he asked Elias, or did she finally brand you back? Elias didn't blink. Still mistaking cruelty for authority, he replied. Beexley's eyes narrowed. She was marked, he said, tapping the badge like it gave him permission. That makes her mine. You can't rewrite history, Gray. No, Elias said quietly, but I can end it. When evil wears a uniform and speaks like law, it takes more than courage to face it. It takes memory, and someone who finally believes her own story. Beexley stepped closer, voice dropping to a growl. I've got men watching that cabin. You think you can hide her forever? Elias's jaw tightened. She's not hiding, he said. She's healing. Then without warning, Mave stepped forward. Not behind Elias, beside him. She looked Beexley straight in the eye. You branded my skin, but I branded your memory. That's why you're still afraid. Beexley laughed cold and cracked. Afraid of a little girl, she said. Afraid of the woman who came back. She didn't flinch, not when he spat, not when he growled. And when he turned and walked away, it wasn't in victory. It was retreat. That night, Elias didn't speak much. He just sat by the fire, his gun a little closer than usual. Mave didn't ask if he was worried. She already knew. The night after Beexley's threat was quieter than it should have been. Too quiet. The trees stood still, their branches barely swaying, and even the owls kept their silence. Elias didn't sleep. He sat near the fire boots on rifle resting across his lap. Every so often his eyes drifted to the window. Just shadows. Just wind. Mave stirred once in her sleep. He looked over. She was breathing steady, tucked beneath the quilt, one hand curled under her cheek like a child. The scar on her thigh peeked beneath the edge of the blanket, still red but no longer defining her. Not here. Not now. Until the dogs stopped barking. Elias rose slowly, fingers tightening around the rifle. He moved toward the door boots, soft against the floorboards. Just as his hand touched the knob, something snapped outside. Then came the voice. Evening, soldier. Elias opened the door just as the first blow landed. It cracked across his temple like lightning, sending him sprawling to the ground. The rifle skidded out of reach. 3 men surged forward, bandanas pulled over their faces, boots stomping mud across the floor. One grabbed Elias by the collar, slammed him into the table. Another delivered a sharp kick to his ribs, still healing from the last beating. Pain flared white in his chest. Where is she? The tallest snarled. Where's the marked bitch? Elias tried to speak but choked on blood. Upstairs, the floor creaked. One of the men shouted, "Up there!" Mave didn't scream. She didn't run. She was already at the top of the stairs, rifle in hand. Her feet were bare, her hair loose from sleep. But her eyes were ready. You touch him, she said, voice flat, and I'll make sure none of you leave this place with breath left. They laughed, a cruel, careless sound. The third man lunged forward. She pulled the trigger. The blast shattered the quiet. The man collapsed, screaming, clutching his leg. Elias pushed himself upright, ribs screaming in protest. The second man turned too slow. Elias grabbed the fire iron from the hearth and swung. A crack, a thud, then silence. The tall one, still standing, looked between Elias and Mave, weighing his odds. Then he ran. Sometimes the ones who were hunted become the storm that ends the chase. Elias collapsed to his knees, breath coming in ragged gasps. Mave rushed to him, dropping the rifle, hands searching his face. "I'm fine," he rasped. "Are you?" She nodded. Her hands were shaking. "They tried to take me," she whispered. "Again." "But they didn't," he said. "Not this time." Not ever again. Together, they dragged the wounded man out to the clearing. By dawn, the sheriff from the next county would arrive, summoned by a rider Elias had sent days ago just in case. He'd been right to be ready. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was this: she had stood her ground, and he had bled for her without hesitation. Inside the cabin, blood dried on the floorboards. The rifle leaned against the wall, and in the quiet that followed, something heavier than silence settled between them. It wasn't fear. It was certainty. The day after the attack, the cabin sat in stunned silence. Mave cleaned the blood from the floor with slow, steady strokes. Not because it was her job, not because anyone asked her, but because it mattered. Because they had bled here for each other, and now something needed to be made clean. Elias stood out by the forge. The fire hissed with breath alive again for the first time in months. He rolled up his sleeves, muscles stiff from bruises, ribs still wrapped, pain still pulsing under each movement. But his grip on the hammer didn't shake. From a leather pouch at his belt, he pulled the bullet. Not just any bullet. The last one he'd never fired. The one that sat in his satchel since the war ended. The one he'd nearly used on himself once when the silence got too loud. He placed it in the flame. Mave stood in the doorway, wrapped in Elias's coat. She didn't ask what he was doing. She knew. She watched the brass casing glow red, then orange. The forge cracked and sizzled, spitting sparks into the wind. Elias pulled the bullet free with iron tongs and laid it across the anvil. Then came the first strike, a sharp, metallic cry, then another, and another. He worked slowly, not like a blacksmith, more like a man carving scripture into steel, like he was burning the past into something new, something sacred. Mave didn't blink. Her hand rested over her heart, as if to hold it still. After an hour, it was done. The bullet no longer looked like a weapon. It was a ring. Raw, rough around the edges, golden from the brass, and dark where the heat had kissed deepest. No jewels, no engravings, just the memory of fire and the hand of a man who had chosen her over war, over vengeance, over fear. He turned. Their eyes met. Some rings are carved by jewelers. Others are forged by survival and cooled by the breath of someone who stayed. That night, they sat beneath the stars, the fire crackling low between them. Elias said little, until Mave reached into her satchel and pulled out the broken mirror, the one she had thrown weeks ago. She had pieced it back together, shard by shard, glued and trembling in its old frame. "I want to see now," she whispered. "I want to remember who I became." He watched as she turned the mirror toward herself. Her reflection was fractured, like a memory, like a scar, but she didn't look away. She saw it all. And then, without a word, she held out her hand. Elias reached into his coat and placed the bullet ring in her palm. "I made this from what should have killed me," he said, "and maybe what should have killed you too." She looked down at the ring, then slid it onto her finger. It fit not perfectly, but right. "I'm not asking you to forget," he said, voice soft. "I'm asking you to build something with me, with the pieces we still have." Her lips parted. A breath, a tremble, a smile. "I already have," she said. Spring warmed the hills of Texas with a gentleness that felt like forgiveness. The wind blew soft through the chapel pines, carrying wildflower seeds and something older, something like grace. The wooden chapel on the ridge wasn't much. A few benches, a crooked bell, white paint peeling at the corners. But on this day it stood taller, stronger, because on this day it was witnessing something rare, a wedding not born of duty or property, but of healing. The townsfolk had gathered with hesitation. They'd heard the whispers of a girl with a brand on her thigh, of a soldier who'd taken her in, not for pity, but for love. Some came out of guilt, some from curiosity, a few because they needed to believe that something good could still rise from all the ugliness they'd chosen not to see. Mave stood just outside the chapel door, her hands trembling only slightly. Her dress was simple. White cotton hand-stitched by Elias himself, crooked seams, uneven hem. But it fit her like a second skin. Her scar visible beneath the fabric's edge caught sunlight without shame. She didn't hide it. She let it speak. A ribbon of lavender was braided through her dark hair, wild and uncontained, and in her eyes no fear, just stillness, just truth. Beside her, a little girl scattered petals from a tin pail. No music played, only birdsong, only breath. When Mave stepped inside, the room went still, not because she was beautiful, though she was, but because she wasn't hiding. They saw the scar. They saw the fire in her eyes, and they stood. One by one, the townspeople rose to their feet. A woman in the front pew, clutching a stitched handkerchief, wiped her eyes. An old rancher removed his hat. A young boy whispered, "She looks like a warrior." And maybe she was. Elias stood at the altar, clean-shaven, wearing a vest that still bore a tear from the last ambush. His ribs were still healing, but his smile that was whole. When she reached him, he took her hands in his. "She's not mine," he said. Voice steady but soft, facing the room. "She was never mine to begin with. She's hers. She's what they tried to break, but couldn't." And if this ring means anything, he pulled her hand up gently, showing the brass band to the crowd. It means love doesn't need to be bought or branded. It just needs to be brave. Some weddings are about lace and flowers, but others are about standing tall, scarred and whole, and letting the world know you made it. The preacher cleared his throat, then let them speak their own vows. Mave's voice didn't shake. "I was told I was ruined," she said, "that no man would ever look at me with kindness again, that I'd never be more than what they carved into my skin." She looked at Elias, tears gathering but not falling. "But you looked at me like I was human, like I was more than what I survived. And because of that, I am." When the preacher said, "You may kiss the bride," Elias didn't move fast. He cupped her cheek like it was something holy, and when their lips met, it wasn't for the crowd. It wasn't even for them. It was for every night she lay awake thinking she wasn't worth saving. For every time he thought his life had already ended. It was for redemption. And when they turned back to face the town, no one sat. They applauded. Not politely, loud, raw, real, because it wasn't just a wedding. It was a reckoning. The preacher cleared his throat, then let them speak their own vows. Mave's voice didn't shake. "I was told I was ruined," she said, "that no man would ever look at me with kindness again, that I'd never be more than what they carved into my skin." She looked at Elias, tears gathering but not falling. "But you looked at me like I was human, like I was more than what I survived, and because of that, I am." When the preacher said, "You may kiss the bride," Elias didn't move fast. He cupped her cheek like it was something holy, and when their lips met, it wasn't for the crowd. It wasn't even for them. It was for every night she lay awake thinking she wasn't worth saving, for every time he thought his life had already ended. It was for redemption. And when they turned back to face the town, no one sat. They applauded, not politely, loud, raw, real, because it wasn't just a wedding. It was a reckoning. Some people inherit a family. Others build one from broken pieces and realize the cracks let the light in. By summer, the wildflowers had taken root along the cabin's edge. Mave planted them herself, kneeling in the dirt, with her skirt tied at the knees, Emmy beside her with a tin pail full of seeds. They laughed when the wind scattered petals across their boots. Later, Elias built a swing, tied to the strong limb of the old cottonwood near the creek, the same creek where he had first found her, the same place where she had once begged him to end her life. Now she stood beneath the tree, steady hands pushing a giggling girl into the sky. Emmy didn't flinch anymore. She screamed with joy. Her scars had faded into memories, not gone but quieter. That summer she started calling Elias Pa, not because anyone asked her to, just because it felt right. And one quiet evening, when the sky turned soft and orange and the sun dipped behind the ridge, she climbed into Mave's lap, rested her head against her shoulder, and said, "Mama, I don't remember before you, but I remember now." Mave didn't answer right away. She simply closed her eyes and let the weight of those words settle into her chest. It was the kind of weight you carry with gratitude, the kind you never thought you'd deserve. Inside the house over time, things changed. The broken mirror stayed broken, but now it hung on the wall. The scar was still there, but Mave never hid it again. The rifle by the door remained, but it hadn't been fired since the wedding. Peace had arrived. Not loud, not sudden, but earned. Each chore was a prayer. Each sunrise a second chance. Each shared laugh a piece of music they'd never thought they'd hear again. And every time Elias kissed Mave's forehead, he thought, maybe this is what survival really looks like. Not just living, but choosing to live with someone. Not just healing, but building. One evening after Emmy had fallen asleep with her hand curled around the paw of a stuffed bear Elias had stitched himself, Mave stepped outside. Elias followed, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. They stood side by side under the stars. "Do you still dream about the war?" she asked quietly. He thought for a moment. "Not the fighting," he said. "Just the parts I didn't think I'd survive." "And now?" He looked at her. "I dream about this, us." She nodded. "I used to think I was just what they did to me, what they carved into me. But you're not." She turned. "And neither are you." He smiled. "Guess we were both wrong about ourselves." She slipped her hand into his, or maybe just waiting to be right, with the right person. The moon rose higher. The wind whispered through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled once, then silence. Mave rested her head on Elias's shoulder, her fingers brushing the edge of her ring. "Funny," she murmured, "how a bullet meant to end a life became the start of a new one." He kissed her hair. "It's not the metal that matters," he said. "It's the hands that reshape it." She smiled. And in that moment, she knew she wasn't a wound. She wasn't a brand. She wasn't a ghost of who she could have been. She was a wife. She was a mother. She was home. If someone branded you by your worst moment, would you let it define you forever? Or would you fight to become someone they never expected? Tell us in the comments. Where are you watching from, and what part of this story stayed with you? Because here at Wild West Love Stories, we believe some legends are made not with guns, but with grace, grit, and the kind of love that stitches broken people into something whole. And if this story meant something to you, hit that subscribe button, because we've got more stories coming just like this one. Stories for you.